Welcome back to the crib. For today's episode, we are going to be going over all of the head coaching hires in the NFL. Now, unfortunately, if we went through all the coordinators and described all their staffs and went through it, it would take about 2 hours. So we're just going to go through and only be grading the head coaches in this video. Now, if you guys are interested and you want us to go more in depth to one of these teams, we would love to do so, but we also don't want to go over an entire staff if no one's going to watch that. So if you guys like what we're saying, you want to hear more, comment, any questions you have, and we'll get back to you on those. But also, if you want us to go in depth onto a full coaching staff, or maybe go more in depth on an individual coach, let us know, and we can absolutely do that. But for today's video, we're going to be going over each of the 9 hires and just briefly talking about them, and then giving a grade for each of these coaches. So, with all that said, let's get into it. First team, the Chicago Bears. Their head coach, Matt Eberflus. I gave the hiring a B grade. Ricky, what did you give him?
I gave them a B minus. The only reason I did that was just because the fact they have Justin Fields, the young quarterback. I would like to see a coach who's had a little bit more experience with a young quarterback. But I get the hire. I think it makes a lot of sense. I think he's a very strong defensive minded coach who can kind of bring back that Bears defensive first culture. So I gave it a B minus.
Yeah, I gave it a B because I do like the hire. Now, I know a lot of people liked Eric Bieniemy at this spot, and I think outside of him and Brian Dabble, I don't think there were that many great offensive minds. So for me, I gave him a B, just because a little higher than you, but just because I do like the hire as a defensive on the defensive side of the ball. Now, what this hire does do, and this is why it doesn't get an A from me, is puts a lot of pressure on that offensive staff, on that offensive coordinator to work with Justin Fields, and there's a ton of pressure there. So that's really what's going to matter for this hire. But Matt Eberflus, good coach, did some great things in Indianapolis, so I'll give it a B. Next guy, Nathaniel Hackett, Denver Broncos hire, and I think this one's very interesting. Obviously, Hackett comes from Green Bay, so the big question is, does this hire mean that Aaron Rodgers is coming? For this discussion, we'll kind of stay away from that, even though I guess it's impossible. But I'm not going to act like Aaron Rodgers is a lock to go there. So when I did that, I gave him a B minus. I think it's hard to give a guy to hire an offensive mind that's never called plays. And you're going to see there are many guys on this list that's kind of their situation. But if you're being hired as a head coach and you haven't called plays as an offensive coordinator, I think you're a little bit limited there. And it's definitely still not like an awful hire or anything. I do think that the Broncos did right by going and getting an offensive mind with all of their offensive struggles recently. But Vic Fangio to Nathaniel Hackett, just overall as a coach, I don't know if that's an upgrade. Now, obviously, Vic Fangio is a lot older than Nathaniel Hackett, so I do get like the direction of the franchise. That's why I gave him a B minus. Don't love it. I think it's solid. I don't really know if I like it. I definitely don't hate it, but just kind of not feeling super hot about this one, I guess.
Yeah, I ended up giving it a C plus just because I wasn't really too sure about it. If Aaron Rodgers comes, obviously that's a huge plus, but we're trying not to look at that too much. So, given his offensive success, it's kind of hard to attribute whether that's Matt LaFleur or him, just with knowing LaFleur's coaching tree. But I think he does have a lot of potential, and I think it's a great hire if you are really trying to grow for the future, and it makes perfect sense given all the offensive weapons that they have.
Yeah, I do also feel like that one's almost kind of incomplete because if Aaron Rodgers goes there, then obviously those grades are getting bumped up because that plays a part in it. Next team, Houston Texans. They hired Lovey Smith. I gave it a C. I don't really have any feelings about this one besides it feels like I do like Lovey Smith. I think anyone that's followed the NFL for years probably has pretty good feelings towards Lovey Smith. Seems like a great guy. I don't really get why teams hire guys when it just seems inevitable that they're going to get fired, and that's what I feel like this is. So C, honestly, don't have much to say. The Texans are in no position to win next year. I think that it's very likely that Lovey Smith coaches 1 year and gets fired, maybe 2. But I don't really see a future with this hire, so can't really give it much. But I do like Lovey Smith, so I'm not going to give him like a D or an F or anything like that.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of Lovey Smith, especially as a positional coach or D coordinator. But as a head coach, I think it's very underwhelming, and you might hear that term come up again for a few other of these other teams. But I also, like you said previously, I don't know if this is an upgrade. Like, to me, Coley definitely overachieved with what he had, and given that, I don't really know if it makes a whole lot of sense to move on to Lovey Smith, especially with where they are as a franchise. If both parties are understanding that he's just gonna be a transitional coach, that's a completely different story. But like you said, I don't really like the mindset of he's just gonna get fired, like, why do that to a guy like Lovey Smith?
Yeah, one thing I will add though is it does seem like by hiring Lovey Smith, they did get to hang on to Pep Hamilton, who has done very, very good things with young quarterbacks and did last year with Davis Mills. So that's something to add there. I don't know if that really was a big factor, but it does seem like Pep Hamilton is staying in Houston. Next hire. Now, I think this is one that people are really up and down on. The Jags hiring Doug Peterson. Now, obviously, Doug Peterson's won a Super Bowl. He had a lot of success in Philly, had a lot of success with Carson Wentz, but it ended very ugly. And also, the last game that he coached for the Eagles wasn't pretty either. One that a lot of people were very upset about. So you look at Doug Peterson, you look at this hire, Trevor Lawrence. Obviously, that's why they go with a guy like him. And like I said before, a lot of these offensive minds I don't really love. Doug Peterson's solid, but I think there's a lot of upside with this hire. I also think it could not end very well, and in 2 years he could be fired as well. Only time's going to tell with that, and Trevor Lawrence's development is really going to be the teller for this one. But I rocked with a B minus for Doug Peterson.
Yeah, I gave Doug Peterson a B. Just given how everything unfolded in Indianapolis this year for Carson Wentz. And I know Carson Wentz is not the same player. He's had unreal injury history. So I know that factors into things, but I still would give Doug Peterson some credit, and especially what he did with Nick Foles too, and just like kind of roundabout of quarterbacks. I think having him influence Trevor Lawrence will really help the future of Trevor Lawrence's development. So I think it makes a lot of sense, and I do like the hire there. I do agree that there's a lot of room for kind of growth or kind of a better hire, but you know with Doug Peterson exactly what you're going to get, and I think stability within the franchise is something that they really need.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do want to say I think this is a significant upgrade over Urban Meyer. I do think there are multiple coaches that got hired on this list. I don't necessarily love the hire, but I do think it's an upgrade. And Doug Peterson is definitely one of those.
And again, with regards to the Jags franchise, I think it comes down to more with ownership and general management. Like we've seen them struggle a lot over the past few years. So even if things don't go well, I'm not necessarily going to point my finger directly at Doug Peterson, even though he will probably be the scapegoat.
Yeah, I think that's a great point because we see a lot of guys come in and not really have an opportunity to win. Hopefully Doug gets that. You got a great quarterback in Trevor Lawrence, and I really hope not necessarily for Doug Peterson, but just for everyone that I do hope that Trevor Lawrence's career is not wasted in Jacksonville. Next hire, I almost said the Oakland Raiders, the Las Vegas Raiders. They hired Josh McDaniels, and this is my second favorite hire of anyone. I gave him an A minus. I think this is great for Derek Carr's career. I think this is a big upgrade over John Gruden, who did sign a $100 million deal a few years back. Obviously, that ended terribly, but Josh McDaniels, yes, when he was in Denver, it wasn't great, but he has put together a very, very impressive resume working with Bill Belichick, and I do think that he has a chance to be a pretty solid coach, an upper tier coach in this league. I love the hire. I think for the Raiders, how up and down are not even really that much ups, but a lot of downs, like a lot of just ridiculous things happening since the Vegas move. This is a nice stable move. You get a guy who's worked with the best, one of the best, if not the best, football mind in the history of the sport. I like the hire a lot. I think it's a big step in the right direction for the Raiders.
Yeah, I gave them an A minus for this. I also think it's a great hire. I personally didn't think anyone was going to pull McDaniel away from New England. I thought he was just going to fill in for Bill whenever Bill wants to give it up. So seeing him go was kind of surprising. I think it's a great hire from a discipline aspect. If you look at the Raiders, their team has kind of lacked discipline. And Josh McDaniel coming from that Patriot system, I think he'll demand a little bit more discipline than we've seen. I can almost guarantee it. And like you said, I think it'll really help Carr, and I think it gives them a chance to even keep Carr. I don't think Carr would have necessarily wanted to stay there without a hire like McDaniel. Um, so I think it makes a lot of sense, and yeah, I give it a minus.
I think that when you talk about discipline too, I think another thing to bring up for this hire is he's going to demand respect. He's a six-time champion as an. I don't know if they're all as an offensive coordinator, but at least the last few were. But he has six Super Bowl rings. So you come into a meeting, you're wearing six Super Bowl rings. You're gonna demand some respect with that. Um, Next guy, similar
Well,
name.
one
Yeah,
last
go ahead.
thing with them. I also think just having like guys like Crosby, Waller, and Carr in your locker room will really benefit a guy like Josh McDaniel. I think they'll speak their mind and really like demand the respect, like you kind of said, and like demand it out of the other players too. So I think having those guys and really building around them and having a coach like Josh McDaniel can really change the culture quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. So next guy, similar name, Mike McDaniel. He gets hired by the Miami Dolphins, and I think this one is really weird. I'll start off by saying I do like Mike McDaniel a lot. You see the 49er banners in the back. I think he had a very, very impressive job being a head coach, or sorry, being a coordinator for the Niners, and mostly being a run game specialist before he was the offensive coordinator last year. Kyle Shanahan has credited a ton of their schemes to him. And basically, if you guys don't know this, any Dolphins fans listening, he and Debo Samuel are very good friends. And before this year started, he and Debo were talking a bunch, and he went up to Debo and he said, "Hey, I'm gonna make you a superstar this year, and then I'm gonna go and get my head coaching job in my bag too." And that's what he told Debo Samuel. Apparently, when it was announced that he was gone, he and Debo talked on the phone that night for hours, and they were both like very emotional. Both of them cried a bunch. So Debo is what you call a war daddy. And if you have a guy like that that's so bought into this guy and Mike McDaniel, I think that shows a lot. Now, the problem with this hire is just everything else about it besides Mike McDaniel. One thing, he does not have a lot of experience. And that is something that's scary. And even though I do think he is a good coach, and I think he is a guy that will be a successful head coach, I don't know if that's in Miami. And a lot of me feels like they're going to hit the reset button if it doesn't work with Tua. And that's a guy I don't have a ton of faith in. I don't think Tua is like horrible, like some people think, but don't have a ton of faith there. If it doesn't work out that well, he's going to get fired. And it's another guy. Like it's just like it's kind of underwhelming. You're hiring a guy that's never called plays, and has only been an offensive coordinator for 1 year, so a very small amount of experience. And you also fired Brian Flores, who I thought did a pretty solid job over the last couple of years in Miami. So I don't like this move that much. Even though I do like Mike McDaniel, if he goes somewhere else, if he goes somewhere okay, say that the Dolphins this upcoming year rocked with Flores and it was really bad and they moved on from him. And then they hired Mike McDaniel after he has had 2 years of offensive coordinator experience with the 49ers. I would like this move a lot more. But it just seems like it's inevitable that he's going to get fired. And this is like his first stunt as a head coach. And it's just going to be really quick. So I gave it a C plus. And I do like the guy a lot, but it's just I don't like the circumstances at all. And I feel like it's not going to end the best for him or for the Dolphins.
Yeah, I actually gave it a D plus, and it's less on the guy and more just the fit. Losing Flores, I think, was huge, and like I agree with you. I don't agree with the firing. I understand it probably more than most, just because of how much money they spent on defense the past couple of years, and it not really panning out in playoffs or playoff wins or overall just standings. So I kind of understand that, especially when you look at the Patriots, and then now you're looking at the Bills, and it's like those teams were down those years that they spent all the money, and now those teams don't look like they're going to be down anymore, and you're still looking relatively the same or more down than you were a couple years ago. So I understand moving on from Flores. I don't really think it was Flores' fault. I think a lot of faulty contracts, faulty trades, and faulty draft picks were more cause of things. But that's why I ended up giving them a D plus on the hire. I think just the fit with a run game coordinator when you have a quarterback who, for me personally, I'm not sold that he is or isn't the answer. I think we still need a little bit more time to see him, um, just with a more competent play caller, um, to really see if he has anything to make or if he's worth his weight or worth the pick or even can make it in the NFL as a backup or anything. Like I am not sold on Tua at all, like any way being bad or good. So I don't like that running coordinator hire. especially when you see the draft capital and the overall capital that the Dolphins have put in the run game. It's not really there. Um, so that kind of bothers me, especially the fact that too that like I don't know, maybe I'm too out of it and not into the talks enough, but I thought Harbaugh was a realistic chance to land in Miami, and it didn't seem like the owner really wanted to pursue it just because of his ties to Michigan. And as an owner, an NFL owner, I don't think you can have those kind of split ties that you're trying to like accommodate or like trying to appease. So to me, when you had Flores or Harbaugh and you end up with McDaniel and it's not even Josh, it's kind of a problem. So that's the only reason the higher I give them a D plus, even though I'm like you, Matt, I'm very confident in the guy as a run game coordinator, offensive coordinator. And I do think eventually he will be a successful head coach in the NFL. I just think he needs a team that fits him.
Yeah, I like that too. And you brought up that you didn't think that it was Brian Flores' fault over the past couple of years. One thing to bring up in that the Dolphins GM Chris Greer has been there since 2000. I think when we start wondering, oh, what's the Dolphins' issue? It's Chris Greer, and I think it's very, very obvious. And I think this is ultimately going to be the issue with Mike McDaniel as well. Like this is why I think he's going to get fired, and it's going to be a pretty short stint. I think he's good. I think he's a very, very good mind. I think he is extremely intelligent, and I like Brian Flores as well. I think he could be a head coach in this league. So I think both these guys are kind of, I feel like they're almost getting like chipped out of good opportunities. So I'm with you. Dolphins fans, we're not trying to rip on your team. I think we feel kind of bad for you guys because I just feel like you've been in such a bad spot, and you've actually had a couple guys that have or Flores and now Mike McDaniel that are solid head coaches and solid minds in the game. But it's a tough one. So gonna have to not give the highest grades on that one. Next team up, the Minnesota Vikings. They take Kevin O'Connell. Now, I don't dislike Kevin O'Connell. I don't think it's the best hire. I've brought it up with multiple other guys before. He hasn't called plays. He's an offensive coordinator. He doesn't have a ton of experience. A lot of people really like him. A lot of people in the Rams feel like he did a lot of stuff there, especially because Sean McVay is so hands on the offense. I thought that they could have, it seems pretty clear that they could have landed Jim Harbaugh. And I think by not landing Jim Harbaugh, I think it puts them in kind of a bad spot because I thought the best spot that Jim Harbaugh could have ended up was in Minnesota. You look at the NFC North right now, the Lions. Okay, yeah, the Lions suck. Maybe in a couple of years there'll be something, but they're not there right now. The Bears have a solid defense, but they have a very young quarterback. Let's give them a second. They're not quite ready. The Packers, if they lose Aaron Rodgers, it might be rough with Jordan Love. We don't know yet. We got to see. I like Jordan Love coming out. I don't like him as much as I did him coming out. That's for sure now. But then you go, okay, well, what about this other team, the Vikings? They have a pretty aging roster, and they do have some young talent. Don't get me wrong. Like they do have some young talent, but a lot of their difference makers, especially on the defensive side of the ball, are getting up there in age. You bring in Jim Harbaugh, and you're going to have a very, very good defensive team. You are going to win the North if Aaron Rodgers is not playing there. And even if he is, you're going to make the playoffs as a wild card team. You are going to make the playoffs for at least the next 2 years, and you can eventually find a way to move off of Kirk Cousins. Oh, that's right. Jim Harbaugh had Alex Smith, and then he ended up getting Colin Kaepernick after that and made a couple runs. I think signing Jim Harbaugh was the best opportunity. And because of that reason, I know I haven't talked about O'Connell, but because of that reason, I'm giving this hire a C+, just because I think they completely missed on that opportunity.
I ended up giving them a B plus, and it's just because I don't think Harbaugh was as realistic of an option here. I think if he was a realistic option to leave Michigan, I think Miami would have been the number one place just because of his connection with the owner, and I think he would have had a lot more control there. Um, the Vikings hired their GM first, so I think that kind of impacted the hire with Harbaugh, and I think their GM is going to be a strong GM. I think we still have to wait and see. But coming from his background in Cleveland, I think he learned a lot from Andrew Berry, and I think he's kind of like the new wave of GMs with these more Ivy League based guys. So and more business background rather than football background, and I think that it might not be beneficial. We'll kind of have to wait and see. But I think having that kind of guy at the helm and then having a bunch of football scouts and strong football executives around him is kind of the way to go. So I actually have him as a B plus, and mainly it's because of the article that I read about what O'Connell did as a coordinator for the Rams. Even though he wasn't calling plays, it sounded to me like his job description more aligned with what a head coach has typically done or historically done. And just because of that, I've given this hire probably maybe a little bit too high of a grade, given the fact that it is an article and it could be fabricated or fluffed up a little bit. But just given on his previous job descriptions, and I've been kind of wondering like, what do these coordinators who aren't head coach or who have head coaches who coordinate, what do they do? And this is the only guy who I've really seen like, oh, this is what exactly what he does. So that's kind of why I have a little bit more confidence moving forward with him compared to other coordinators who don't have play calling experience with their previous team.
And Ricky, when you're talking about that, what exactly did he do? Like, what was his role on the Rams?
Just more so with personnel adjustments, kind of more so his help with like the defense. He did a lot of stuff with the defense that I was kind of surprised about. Um, More so just like scouting, film work, passing game coordination, kind of stuff that I wouldn't expect from an offensive coordinator. I maybe expected it from a run game coordinator or a pass game coordinator because I know those guys typically work with the opposite positional coaches a little bit more. But having that kind of experience from an offensive coordinator was kind of a unique standpoint. And I think he did a lot in terms of personnel and just kind of realizing where they needed help and kind of helping the GMs address that. And I think that's a huge standpoint that the Rams have done and kind of the reason that they made the push that they did to win the Super Bowl. So I think he's going to have a lot of success managing the team. Again, though, his overall success is going to depend on the talent that the general manager can bring in and how well his coordinators can call play. Or, well, they haven't hired an offensive coordinator yet, but I'm assuming they're going to hire an offensive coordinator and he won't call the plays. But yeah, just kind of how the coordinators are going to achieve and do their jobs.
Yeah, and I know I was pretty negative on the hire, but I will say to any Vikings fans listening, they're like, "Oh, this guy's an idiot." I'm rooting for the Vikings. One of my best friends is a Vikings fan, so I always end up rooting for them. And I was just frustrated by this because I thought that the Vikings would be in a good spot over the next couple of years. Maybe it doesn't change. Ricky, you're a lot higher on the O'Connell hire than me, and I don't know a ton about Kevin O'Connell. Like you said, he had a ton of success with the Rams. I mean, the Rams were great last year, and when he's been there, you look at McVay's hires, like I do have faith in kind of the Shanahan, McVay, LaFleur tree that we've seen go throughout the NFL, and it's grown a lot. So there's a big plus there. But having an interesting role as an offensive coordinator, like you brought up, where you are working a lot more with the defensive staff with scouting and whatnot. And I'm assuming that's a lot of opponent scouting and also probably scouting your own defense as well a lot too, and especially in practice film. I do think that can go a long way. And maybe he does take almost more of an administrative head coaching role. And we've seen a lot of guys have a ton of success with that. So it could work out really well. I'm not super high on it, but I'm also not super high on it because I thought it was not the best hire that they had in front of them. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at there. Two more left. So one of them is my lowest grade. One of them is my highest grade. We'll go with the lowest grade first. So the New Orleans Saints, they go and they hire Dennis Allen. And I did not like this at all. We've talked about it multiple times going through all these grades. I think that Dennis Allen is another guy. You're going to hire him because your cap is in complete shambles. You have an aging defensive roster that, granted, is really good and last year was amazing. He's going to get fired in a year or two. It's just a place filler, and I absolutely hate when they do that. I would have liked to see them maybe do something where they get an offensive mind in this, keep kind of rocking with Winston, or go and get a younger quarterback and kind of start moving for the future, and slowly transition to this team that has a ton of money put into it, and start kind of trading some assets away, maybe finding some replacements and having an easier transition. I think it's going to be kind of ugly in New Orleans for a couple years, and I don't think this hire is really going to go anywhere. And I get where they're coming from. Like you fired Sean Payton late, you didn't really know what you're going to do, but I don't know. I don't necessarily love this one. But Ricky, what are you thinking?
Yeah, I gave them a C. Um, given Sean Payton stepping down, I just don't know what they would do. Like you said, their cap is in complete shambles. One of their arguably their best player, arguably second best player, has barely touched the field in 2 years. Might even be three. I'm not sure, but they have a very tough very tough situation. I just don't really know who would take that job because I kind of view it like you said, like no matter what, you're going to get fired. I think their money is too tied up for them to really compete or really even just like the team has such high expectations being in New Orleans, being what they've been in the past with Sean Payton, with Drew Brees, with all the weapons they've had. The expectations are just too hard to manage, especially when you look at that division, it's gonna be down if Tom Brady leaves. Like you have Tampa Bay, Carolina, Atlanta, New Orleans. Like there's a chance that's the worst division in football next year, to be completely honest. Um, so expectations are still going to be there regardless. So I don't think it's a head coaching job that very many candidates or strong candidates or candidates that can grow would really even like look at. So I know I gave it a C, but I do think it's probably the best they can do. But given that, I don't think it's a very good situation for them to have dug themselves into. Um, I think he's been a phenomenal defensive coordinator, and I understand hiring him because if you hire someone else, there's probably a good chance he's gone. Like you typically don't see carryovers too often. So unless they're more forced on by management, like you really don't see them. Um, so I think hiring him makes a lot of sense. He's been phenomenal with the revolving cast. Um, but yeah, I do agree that an offensive mind would have been interesting. I think this organization is kind of going to be in shambles and in a rebuild for the next couple of years until they can figure out their cap space a little bit better. Like the NFL, you can manipulate cap space to work very favorably for you, but not when you're this deep. I just don't even think they have a hope of like acquiring high end talent outside of the draft. So I just think it's too big of an issue.
Yeah, definitely get that there. And like you said, I think the one thing was they could have got Eric Bieniemy. And there's been a lot of questions about Eric Bieniemy, especially because apparently there's a rumor that he could get fired from the Chiefs. Time will tell on that. Not sure where that came from, but I have heard that it's kind of been floating around. Um, who knows if that happens? But I think that's one that the other person that was kind of in that final running. But yeah, not a big fan. I think the Saints are going to be in kind of a tough spot even though they do have a lot of talent on their team right now. And I think that's the part that kind of like for me, it's just like, okay, you have a lot of stuff there. You have a great defense. I don't know how much you're gonna be able to keep. I think it's very likely that either Alvin Kamara or Michael Thomas are gone. If not before the season starts, during the season, if they're not doing too well. But yeah, time's gonna tell in New Orleans. I'm just not a fan of this hire. So, the final team that we're going to be talking about, saving the best for last, the New York Giants. I thought this was not a very good not a very desirable location for a coach to want to go to, but they end up getting Brian Dabble. How do you feel about Brian Dabble, Ricky?
I gave them an A minus. I think it's a phenomenal hire. It honestly could be an A. I just time will tell. Um, I think he's done a phenomenal job in Buffalo with developing the quarterback and just everything. So I think he is a phenomenal hire, especially having like we've talked about a lot. A lot of their success depends on GMs and stuff, and having that familiarity because their GM is also from Buffalo. Having that familiarity is just huge, and I think like they're gonna put together like their GM is gonna put together a roster that he would like to see and he wants to coach. So I think that's gonna be really beneficial. And I give them an A minus, could be an A very easily. Just the overall lack of experience as a head coach, or I mean, all these guys pretty much, but it's kind of the new wave of the NFL hiring guys who don't have experience as head coaches, trying to get new faces in. So I understand it and I get it. A little bit of less of a fan of it. I like to see guys who have a little bit more established um, history, and if they've done a great job coordinating, like me and Matt have said, like we blame less on coaches and more on GMs just because if you don't have a roster that you can actually win with, I don't know what you can do as a coach to really overcome that in the NFL. So there are like a few other older coaches or previous coaches who've been successful at coordinators that I think could have gotten hired or something like that. But at the end of the day, like, I think it's probably one of the best hires, if not them or the Raiders for me were the two best.
Yeah, for me, I definitely thought this was like a home run for the Giants. I didn't think they were going to be able to land him, and them doing that, I was shocked first of all, and my immediate thought was, all right, let's talk up Daniel Jones, because this is a really good spot for him to be in. Also, one thing to mention, I know we said we weren't going to talk about coordinators much, but they did also hire Wink Martindale, so you have Double running the offense, and then Wink Martindale running the defense. I like that a lot. So I think if they can get the offensive line figured out, they're a big threat in the NFC. They can make a wild card, maybe not next year because they would need some significant upgrades on that offensive line. But when you look at that team, they got Saquon at running back. There's definitely health concerns there. At wide receiver, I'm very high on Kadarius Toney. I think he's going to have a breakout year, if not this coming up season, then the year after that. Like I have faith in him. Kenny Golladay, big contract. They do have a lot of guys on the defense side of the ball that are making a lot of money, but their defense has been really good over the last couple of years. So I think this is a team that is a little bit slept on, and this is just a great hire. So I'm giving them an A. I love it. My favorite hire of everyone. So props to the Giants because it feels like they finally might have figured it out.
Yeah, I actually like I tried not to, but I did factor some coordinated positions into their hires, and mainly like I'm not fully on board with Wink yet. I know everything in Baltimore wasn't necessarily his fault, but you see the way that certain talent performs elsewhere, and you kind of got to wonder if their situation in Baltimore didn't put them in the best advantage. So I kind of wonder if he knows how to use his players to the best of their ability. I think he's definitely an effective coordinator, but there is that aspect. And just going over all of our grades for these hires, like if their GMs are not cooperative or do not put together the team they want, or as a team or as like a team between the head coach and the GM or head coach or owner, whatever, they blow their draft picks and they make terrible deals. None of these coaches are going to be successful at the end of the day. Like you have to put together a strong team. You have to know how you to spend your money, know how to use your draft picks, and for you to have a successful, relevant chance to be a long-term head coach, that's what really needs to happen.
Yeah, couldn't agree more with that. I mean, we have a couple of these guys too that we did bring up. Doug Peterson, his GM is Trent Ball. He has his work cut out for him there. So I mean, a lot of guys like you're in a tough spot. So we'll see it all ends up. I do think that's why the Giants are in the best spot because of that familiarity, and also I think they got the best of the bunch. But only time will tell with all this stuff. Let us know what you guys think about the grades. You know, if we knocked your team, I apologize. But we'll see how it turns out. For your guys' sake, if we did knock the hire, hopefully we are wrong. Hopefully your teams have a lot of success. But with all that said, this is first segment I think of To the Crib that we've done. Maybe we did one other one of NFL based stuff, but pretty pumped. We're gonna be doing a lot more stuff like this. And if you guys have been subscribed to the channel before, there's only 49ers content. We are going to continue to do 49ers content, but we are also going to do a lot of NFL draft and NFL content as the season goes on, or as the offseason goes on. Later this week, we're going to be doing our top 5 quarterbacks, so make sure to stay tuned for that. And if you guys want NFL, 49ers, NFL draft content, make sure to hit that subscribe button. But with all that said, thank you so much for listening, and we'll be talking to you guys later this week.